Okay, I wanted to experiment with doing a video, even though I don't typically do videos on Instagram or anywhere else. I've been knitting for about 40 years or more, and I've noticed, a lot of doing swatching and trying to do swatching for knitting in the round, where people end up doing strands across the back and then cutting those in order to block them. Now, I have an allergy to cutting yarn when I don't have to. And so what I wanted to do, but I disliked doing those types of swatches. And so I would just basically swatch a tube for knitting in the round. Just knit a small tube, require a little more work, but then I could just unravel it. I could block it, unravel it, and figure it out. But recently I was just trying to do just enough of the swatch for a sweater, and I thought I'd go ahead and pull those long strands around the back, but make them long enough so I could block without cutting the strands, when something occurred to me, and I realized I could do that same technique of pulling a long strand around the back, but not have the strands needing to be cut at the end. And so what I did was I would pull a very generous loop around the back to start knitting again, but instead of knitting with the live yarn, I would actually knit across with the loop. And that would just leave some left over at the edge of the yarn versus across the back. Slide back over, pick up the live yarn, knit across. And again, form a large loop. Next row, I would knit with the loop itself until I have a little left over at the end, slide back, knit with the live yarn again. And by doing this, I could knit, again, simulate knitting in the round, see what my gauge in the round would be, not have strands running across the back, maybe have some loops hanging off of the left-hand side, and be able to block and swatch, and basically be able to swatch, block, and do all that without cutting a single strand of yarn, and then get an idea what my gauge would be. I'm assuming somebody else has figured this out as well, but I've never seen it, and I see plenty of swatches in the round where people cut the yarn going up the back, and I thought it might be worth putting this information out there. So I'm going to record an example of doing exactly that. Okay, so here's my example. I've started knitting this swatch for a sweater that I'll be knitting in the round, and the idea is I wanted to avoid having the long strands running across the back. Now I've already done a couple of rows, and you can see what the result is when I use this technique that I'm talking about. I'll have a little loops here off to the left-hand side of the swatch, but not across the back. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the working yarn and I'm going to give it a very generous loop. Basically the idea is to pull enough yarn to be able to make it across the back with the loop that you're forming. And sorry if I'm bumping into the camera here. Kind of got a bit of a jury rig setup. But now, so I've got the loop across, but what I'm going to do, instead of knitting with the live yarn, I am basically picking up and knitting with the loop itself. As you can see, this excess of the yarn that you'd generally be much shorter than this, but you would loop across the back. And so let me get that done. So I'm going to knit across here relatively quickly. Maybe. But yeah, it was funny. I was knitting a swatch, and it just like, I realized that I could do this. And I thought, man, that, just avoid having huge loops hanging across the back and having to cut them and that kind of thing. I thought some other folks might appreciate that. You also get to see how I knit, which is probably a little different. I taught myself how to knit back in 1982 while I was living in Wales. And so I basically got a book and some yarn and some needles and took it all home and sat there and kind of looked at the diagrams and worked it out and started knitting. And that was how I got started. All right, so now we're all the way over here to this other edge. Let's see, have we done the last stitch? Yeah, it's a little loosey-goosey over here. Get that last stitch there. Okay, so now, I've knit with the loop, and I've got a little hanging off over here. I have a little less hanging off last time. It all depends on how well you can guess how much yarn you need, and I'm just going to slide it back across. And let's just go ahead and start knitting. Oh, I keep bumping the camera. All right, and just start knitting with the live yarn this time. And I try to keep it a little relaxed over here so I don't tighten up that edge too much. We're mainly interested in measuring the swatch in the middle of this. I usually put on about 10 or so extra stitches around the yarn, around the edges of the swatch, so that I have the 4-inch piece in the middle to measure, at least what's hopefully going to be 4 inches. And so yeah, and so that's how you do it. And so we repeat the process again, get to the other side, pull a very long generous strand and knit across with the strand, slide back across, and then knit across with the live yarn and repeat for as long as you need to make your swatch. And that's all there is to it. I'll get over here to the other end. You'll see that it's a little loosey-goosey at the edge there, but whenever you're doing this type of swatching with looped yarn, whether you're knitting with the loop or not, you always kind of have a little loosey-goosiness about the edge there. Okay. Oop. Let's keep that out of the way. All right, and that's it. There's my progress so far. No strands across the back, loops at the left edge of the work, and I'll continue on and see if I'm getting the gauge that I want. All right, good luck, folks. Enjoy your knits.